Here we go.
Oh, that's why. Ben, you have to turn your
Click.
volume down a little.
Yeah, I can hear myself. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yep.
I think that's why yours quiet for me because I turned it down because Ben was really hot.
Oh, I see. All right, I'll bring myself down a little bit. And we're live as I bring my gain down. It is Tuesday, February 16th, 2020, 5:01 p.m. And Nancy Pelosi has announced that she wants a 9/11 style commission to study January 6th. And I have a nominee for who should be the head of this commission. Needs to be somebody who can work well across parties, who knows extremist movements, who knows his or her way around major investigations, and who doesn't really give a shit who he or she offends. So I'm nominating myself because this seems like a really fun gig. And I promise to write a report if I'm run this commission that will, take no prisoners, bar no holds, and will gut punch people where they need it, from the people who prepped at the senior levels of the Capitol Police to the FBI, who didn't seem to, except in the field office in Virginia, didn't seem to notice that a horde of white supremacists was descending on Washington, to Republicans who gave them tours of Congress. So I just think I'm here, I'm available, I'm really not that busy, and I'm totally ready to run this commission. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. As you can see, so I've been fantasizing about running a federal commission. But in lieu of fun, Dwayne Betts returns to the show.
In lieu of fun?
Well, that's what we always say when we introduce the guest.
I know, but I mean, I hadn't heard my name after in lieu of fun for so long.
I think we did that. We didn't know if we had that sign off. It's true.
It's good to see you again. Welcome back.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here.
Do you want to endorse my candidacy to run the January 6th commission?
Oh, wholeheartedly. I should say though, after I wrote that piece on Senator Harris, I don't know if they're listening to my endorsements as much. I thought the piece was really good, but I don't think they're listening to me.
Yeah, I have a feeling my they're going to give my self-nomination the deference it warrants.
Well, you got to know, I self-nominated myself to be the commencement poet, and we see how that worked out.
Yeah. So what'd you think of her?
No comment.
Really?
No, this is what I think for real.
That was the main problem.
No, this is what I think for real. I think that occasional poems are impossible to write, and I think that
poem, just like a speech that's a poem that's for like a thing, like what it sounds like.
Yeah, like an occasion poem is you getting married, and somebody says, Dwayne, will you write a poem? I'm getting married. That's an impossible poem to write, and I've written a few, or somebody dies, and it's like, will you write a poem for the funeral? And those are just really, really difficult to do.
Why is that?
Because it takes me. Typically, you write something you spend a year thinking about. I wrote that Kamala Harris piece, and this is not poetry, but this is prose, right? But I spent 18 months thinking about that piece and writing about it, and it was elements in that piece that I thought about for a decade. And so poetry works the same way. Some of the things come right there, but some of the ideas and things you've been thinking about for 5, 10, however old you are, you might have been thinking about 15, 20 years. But the occasional poem comes, and it's like, I need to write a poem that does X, Y, and Z, and I'm on a deadline, and this shit is like a mediocre op-ed, in terms of just like...
I've written a lot of mediocre op-eds.
Right. So I think, but it served its purpose though, because a op-ed, like, it has an audience. If you write an op-ed that's topical, nobody's saying they need to be able to read your op-ed 5, 10 years from now. They're just saying that, like, does it satisfy their need in the moment? And I think her poem satisfied the need in the moment. The one thing I will say, is I you think about the platform that it creates for the public, and I think that they understood that the poem wasn't meant to challenge us in a real way. And sometimes I wish that somebody would be aggressively badass and say, you know what? Did you read the Gettysburg Address? I want you to drop some shit like that on us. And you know that they didn't say that. It was like, look, don't be controversial. Don't say the word prison. And like, should we ask Dwayne to do it? I'm certain he's gonna say prison 5 times, 10 times. No, no, he gonna talk about incarceration. Hell no, So, so I think it was what it was. I mean, I'm glad she got the opportunity, and I'm glad it made us talk about poetry for a little while. But I think that we should recognize again that it's also a reflection of what the incoming president wanted to hear. You could imagine some invitations would have on the surface been like, "Whoa, you invited that person, Martina Spada? This is the person who you want, who was a former housing attorney, who has written book and book and book and book and book that's amazing and political. Just even asking him to do it would have demanded something different.
Yeah, totally. So I want to, so let's talk about Amanda Gorman and like let's also talk about like, okay, right? I kind of actually am with you on the staying power of the piece. I agree. I saw it and I got chills, but I would have to say that those came from seeing her performance of it. Like she just was I thought she was a super talented performer. And so she could have like been reciting the alphabet and she did it with such incredible kind of just poise and like her movement. What do you think? You didn't love
I'm
it?
just I'm
I
just
want
not
to
gonna
hear it.
go. I'm 40 years old, so I'm just not gonna go on the record like criticizing a 22-year-old's work of art. I mean, I teach 15-year-olds right now. I've taught college students. Like, I'm just not gonna pretend like one. I'm not gonna criticize the work because she's like 22, and I'm gonna recognize that if you read some of the poetry that I wrote when I was 22, it was just ridiculous. And so, yeah, she performed it well, and her ability to perform it well let us hear everything that she was saying. But again, because it was an occasion poem, we was listening for a certain thing, and she delivered that thing that we were listening for. I just think we
Yeah.
have to be realistic. Like, I don't even like my 22-year-old self. You know what I mean? So I'm just impressed that at
I don't
22, she
I
could
don't
stand in front of
remember
a
my
nation.
22-year-old self.
Damn, how much have you drank? I remember my 22-year-old self. I was in prison, and but I was a
Oh my
poet.
God, there you go saying prison again. I can't take you anywhere, Dwayne. um,
Yeah.
yeah, no,
Speaking of
I think you
prison,
have a good point. Ben? Sorry.
speaking of prison, so looks like no matter how much I turn down my volume, it's still really loud. Is it really loud, people in the chat?
It's much better for me now. But
Yeah, I'm good. I think mine was low. I had to turn mine up.
All right. So tell us about this project that you're working on.
yeah.
Yes, the Million Book Project. It's interesting. It's funded by Mellon. We got a $5 million grant from Mellon, and essentially we're curating freedom libraries. And the idea is that freedom begins with a book. And you go into prisons across the country, and I mean literally a lot of them don't have libraries. But even when they do have robust, well-stocked libraries, the libraries don't exist. I'm looking behind Kate, and you see your library. You see some books. Like all of us have books in our home. I mean, I got 5 books beside me. I got like 20 books on my floor. I got a shelf right here, and I got 1,000 books in the closet. My sons got books in their bedrooms. My wife got her own bookshelf. We could all touch books just by waking up in the morning. You could spend 5 years in prison and literally never see a bookshelf. And so we're curating a freedom collection, a freedom library, and those 500 books they run the gamut. It's classics, but it's also some contemporary work. But the other thing we're doing, which I think is revolutionary, is we're working with an architect design firm to build a bookshelf and to transform the space. You know somebody who's done time. What they know is they know the bars, they know the steel bunks, and then they know that toilet sink contraption that exists in like every prison cell in the world, or at least in the United States. We're trying to bring bookshelves in that space and do something to push so many books in that we understand the need to push people out. And in addition to that, though, like that's the centerpiece of the project. But in addition, um, we're bringing writers in. Most writers have never been inside of a prison. I've been in dozens of prisons in the United States, and often they're like, "I've never seen a writer in a prison before." And it strikes me as odd, given that there's so many writers that, live and work and write in every state in this country. And I'm talking about from Wisconsin to Maryland to California. It's just like folks don't come inside. And so it's very easy to do something to people when it's under the cover darkness. And so part of the project is to bring more writers into these spaces to share their work, but also to see and to be seen.
And can I ask, like, if are you curating the same collection of books, so it's a sort of like no pun intended, off the shelf package that you
Yep.
can just kind
It's a
of
good question.
bring into
hmm
any prison, or is it more particularly curated to the particular prison in question?
No, it's the same. It's the same collection. And we did the collection like like the idea that a bookshelf is a combination of things. It's it's the books that you love. It's the books that you've been given that you want to read, and then it's the books that you've asked for that somebody gave you that you expect to read at some point, and it's the books that you borrow and you never return. And so we're creating a collection that's the same. It'll be some variants because one prison might say, "Nah, we're not taking that. That we're not having felon in here. It's some graphic content in there." But by and large, you want the shelves to be largely the same.
And so what's the volume, like how many books are in this collection and how many prisons are you expecting to deliver it to?
500, and the number of prisons depends on how much money people give us. Like I'll make one admission here is at first we thought we would do like 1,000 prisons. That's a 500,000 books. But then what that means is you're putting one freedom library in each prison. But you could take one prison and that prison might have 10 housing units. Well, if you just put one freedom library in one housing unit, you've just created gross inequity in the prison. And you're doing the very opposite of what you intended to do. And
That's
so
a
that's
great point.
so that's why we would go to that prison where it's 10 housing units. We would try to saturate the prison with freedom libraries. We might not put 10 in there, but we would put 8. And in every prison, we put one, in the library, in a majority of the housing units, and one for the guards to access. Because the other thing is, like guards need to read too. Correctional officers need to read too. And to have them supportive of the project, they need to see that the mission of the project is not just to edify the folks inside, but it's to recognize that they're inside as well.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that it's like striking me, and okay, I don't want to like take this over with like crazy ideas, but I was thinking how cool it would be if you guys had a website that showed the bookshelf. Like there was images for each of like the different categories you're talking about, and then you could have people maybe in like a Patreon type of way, like buy a book. Like if they think that people should
Yeah.
read Moby Dick, they could like see Moby Dick is on the bookshelf, and that they could like buy 3 copies of it to go into 3 different libraries to like kind of and to crowdsource it like that and visualize it like that so that people could see from the outside what they're creating on the inside for people would be
Yeah.
like
So,
a really cool part of that. Sorry, I'm
so
just like
no, no. So right
spitballing.
now we just released our website maybe last week. It's millionbookproject.org.
Oh shoot, I was clicking. I sent around the Million Book Project link for the sorry for the from the Justice Collaboratory. Should I send around the Million Book
Yeah,
Project?
yeah, yeah. You should sit
Okay,
around.
I'll send that one
I
around.
got
Sorry.
it.
Thanks, Ben.
And so if you look at that, and if you look at the donate page, we did create some different tiers of donation to make people see what they're doing. I have 80% of the books determined. I haven't revealed it publicly, mainly because we want to create some excitement around it. But also, we're on the last stages of the curation process, and some of the things that I've selected might get the heave ho. And we're in the final sections of choosing our Spanish language books because we want to have
Cool.
between 10 and 15% of the books be Spanish language.
Oh, I hadn't even
Um,
thought of that. Of course,
yeah,
they have to. Yeah, that's
and,
like a huge undertaking. How
and
do you
so
decide which ones are going to be? Are they books that were written naturally in Spanish, or they are translations?
both. It depends. And most of them are naturally in Spanish, but you want to have both because I'm not saying this person's book is in there, but like think about somebody like Juno Diaz. He wrote in English. You want to have it in Spanish just because of the subject matter and who he is as a figure, as a contemporary writer. Um, but the curation process was dope. Like what we did a few things. First, we sent out a survey. That was basically a brilliant idea that was stupid because it was like you
Surveys, like asking everyone their opinion is always like, this is the best idea until you start getting the
Yeah.
survey
Nah,
responses
because
back.
well, I mean, and the responses were cool, but you realize that like you don't. I mean, most of these books we had heard of or we have read, but if we hadn't heard of it and hadn't read it, you're not going to read a book based on somebody just writing the name of the book. You know, somebody's like Brothers Karamazov is an amazing book, and I'm like, I don't know who Dostoevsky is, but no, like they wouldn't say that though. They would say like, I'm gonna give you a perfect example, a book I
Oh yeah.
hadn't read before, Angels of America.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
so
It's so good. Where's my Angels of America? God damn it. Sorry, keep going.
so I
I'm
like how
very
Kate just
excited.
pretended like she got that book and she read it before.
Oh
Um,
fuck off.
but like I'm gonna tell you what this guy said about it though. So I hadn't read the book, and we did these things called we called them book circles, and so Wesley Moore said about Angels of America, I could read that every day for the rest of my life and never feel like I've gotten to the bottom of it. It's
Mm.
one of the most inspirational things I've ever read. It's one of the great attempts to reckon with a moment in American life, but by wrestling with that American moment, you must reckon with the centuries that lead up to it and help produce it. There is such wisdom in its anger. How you take ideas and wrestle with them in a melodrama is a really hard thing to do, and this does it and it's great. And so, what happens is we had these things called curatorial conversations, and they was basically like focus groups. And so that one was with Emily Bazelon, Sasha, I think Sasha Weiss and Wesley Morris, and they just got on a Zoom just like we on, and they just talked books, and they talked about the books they loved with each other, and we recorded it, and then we went back through it and mined it for content for books that I known, books that I didn't know, and then we got the books, then we sampled the books and read it and use that as a way to like say, okay, yeah, he was right about this, or maybe not. And then we also consulted a series of experts like Jill Lepore and a bunch of other folks, Murray Helen Washington, and we just talked to them about the books in that field, and we gave them a glance at some of the books that we were considering. And it was fun because like when people
I was
talk
just gonna
about
say,
books they
like that
love, it's
that
crazy.
sounds so damn fun. Like that
Yeah.
sounds like
And
a that
sorry,
sounds
go
like
ahead, Kate.
that just sounds so fun. Like you get all these really cool people to tell you their favorite books, and then like they're ones you haven't heard of, and you get to like listen to them. That's so amazing. I think that's amazing.
So, who is other than you and involved in this? It's is it a group or is it a private thing that you're doing?
So for staff, so first I should say, because people get confused about this, Mellon was not going to give me $5 million. It was a rumor that I was going. It was a rumor. They was like, "Yo, Dwayne already has plane tickets to South Africa. He's just waiting to check." So I had to partner with Yale Law School in the Justice Collaboratory, which is actually great, right? Because HR and just it's just so much need for administrative support, and we get
Right.
so much of that support basically free. And so that's amazing. And then also they sort of manage the money and we get healthcare, so that's great. I have a project manager named Tess Wheelwright who used to run. She used to be like the academic director or academic program manager of a college and schools program in New York. And then Molly Anger is our program coordinator. So we're like the three main employees. But then we sort of have an army. We got, I think at this point, 12 or 13 advisory board members, and we got a couple of we got a army of RAs, and we got a couple of special advisors. And then because we coordinate with so many projects across the country, like if you look at the website and you just see our partners, you see 30 partner organizations that's working with us already, and these range from publishers to education providers to penitentiaries, and also like to speakers bureaus. So it's been pretty fantastic the kind of support that we've gotten.
Well, that's so. How long have you been up?
6 months.
So I have
That's
just
awesome.
tried twice to make a contribution through the site, and it has rejected both times. And I don't
Oh
think
no.
it's because of my
Well,
credit
don't make
card.
Dwayne like
Um,
don't make
no, no, I'm
Dwayne
not
fix
asking
the
for
bug, but
tech.
it's
I'm
good to
not
it's
asking for
really
tech
good to know that.
support, but
Dwayne, so I want to kind of, for the
No,
people
we
that
are going to
don't,
get that tech support.
yeah, we'll figure that out.
Oh, I clicked it. If you click it, so if it depends on what page you click it on, right? Because one of the things is they had us make sure that you want to put donate on the bottom of every page. But the thing is, we want people to really understand what they're donating to. So when you click donate, it should take you to the last page, and that last page describes you can support the Million Book Project by making a financial donation to our ongoing work, and it describes supporter, book donor, book circle sponsor, statewide book circle sponsor, freedom library sponsor, freedom shelf sponsor. And then when you click that button on the left, donate to the project, it takes you to the Yale website.
So you
And
really want to be honest about it by making it difficult to take our money.
basically yeah.
Um,
And, you know, and it was funny because at first we had it just going straight to Yale, and I wanted people to know what the affiliation of Yale was, because when that pop-up donate came at first, it went straight to the Yale site, and people didn't understand what the affiliation was.
Up in that place.
Yeah, so
so
I just donated $10,000 too. If anybody wants to give a matching donation. Nah, no, I didn't.
I wanted to ask really quickly, Dwayne, for the people that don't know, like a little bit, read us into like your bio, but if you could kind of target it with like how you got to prison, but then also like what got you into reading in prison. Like my memory, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory was that you were like a pretty decent student before you went to prison. You were not kind of like a juvenile delinquent, really. Like you did this one bad thing and made this mistake, but like you were like, you know, getting okay grades and like, okay, well,
I mean, because
possible to get okay grades and be a juvenile.
Right. That's what I'm about to say. You know,
Venn diagram of the day.
Yeah.
Dwayne Betts.
No, it's interesting though, because I was 16 and I carjacked somebody, and it was on December 7th, 1996, and so I got arrested the next day because we went to the mall to go shopping, and yeah, and I ended up pleading. I confessed this day I got arrested within like 10 minutes, and I pled guilty, and carjacking carries life, and in Virginia, so I was facing life, and I was sentenced to 9 years, and it's not that I wasn't reading before. I mean, I was like the poster child for reading. I read Evelyn Wood's Guide to Speed Reading when I was 15. You know, I was like about it. You know, I read Chinoa Achebe.
Speed read?
It's no such thing as speed reading.
Yeah, that's what I've always learned.
There's no such thing as speed reading.
Okay,
I mean, people.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, people say it. I don't believe them. I think it's just clearly a lie. It's sort of like saying that you've seen ghosts. Um, and so yeah. I was a smart kid. I was an honor roll student. Like, you know, class treasurer. And then I was a convicted felon. And it was one day to the next. You know, that was my profile. On December 7th, I was an honor roll student, a class treasurer. And on, you know, February, I guess, 19th, or whenever I pled guilty, I become a convicted felon. And you know, in prison, I read in prison too, but I think what really turned me into a poet was, it describes it a little bit on the website, but I was in solitary confinement, and somebody slid this book, The Black Poets, to me. And the thing is, you know, I had read poetry
Wait, was
before.
it somebody like you still don't know, or
Yeah, because back then books were contraband if you were in a hole, and so dudes was just like, if somebody asked for a book and I got one, I give it to you, and that was just the unspoken rule. And so somebody was like, "Yo," I was like, "Send me a book," and somebody slid me The Black Poets into my cell, and I pick it up, and I'm like, "Damn." And it just completely changed what I thought about what I could communicate to the world, and how quickly I could communicate it to them. So I just started writing, and the rest is somewhat history.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah. Dwayne, what do you consider your day job these days? You're running this Million Book Project, but like, then the New York Times named you to be their poetry editor. The New York Times Magazine named you to be the poetry editor. What has, like, you're trained as a lawyer. We were in the PhD program together, which, like,
you finished.
Which I did finish, but I had less choice than you. I would have to say.
I'm ABD, and I've learned that ABD means something.
A million amazing things.
ABD is its own status.
I'm like,
it's like going to Juilliard and not graduating. Like, the people that graduate are the failures. Like,
I'm ABD, but no, it's funny. I got four people out of prison over the past like roughly the past year. So I think a few things. I do a few things, and I don't know. It's like a kaleidoscope of work that I'm trying to revolve. That I'm trying to let like dictate who I am.
So what's the rough balance of your efforts these days? How much are you advocate for, like what percentage of your time are you poetry editor for the New York Times, advocate for individuals who are incarcerated, and Million Book Project proprietor? What's the rough balance of your time?
The Million Book Project is a full-time job. I mean, literally. I didn't expect it, but we got partnerships. Right now, we've sent in 5,500 books because we've been seeding what you call book circles because we recognize it's a pandemic. Folks aren't able to get to the library anyway. So we've sent in 2,000 copies of Felon. I made a Freedom edition of my book because hardback books can't get in. So I raised some money to fund a paperback edition that I call the
A
Freedom
freedom
edition.
edition? I
Yeah.
love that. What a great,
And
like, yeah, sorry, I've never heard that before.
yeah, I
Do you
sent
have
in.
it? Is it the same cover?
It's the
What's it look
same
like?
cover, but it's the same cover, but it's paperback. I
Oh,
have it
okay,
somewhere.
so
I'll
cool.
find it. But I sent in. Oh, here it is right here. Yeah, it's the same cover, but it's paperback. And so I've sent in you sent in like
It's
2,000,
such a good cover.
2,000 of those, and then we sent in hundreds of copies of Miriam Tave's book, hundreds of copies of Erica Sanchez, just a wide range of writers. We sent in about 100 copies of Baldwin, but all told, we sent in 5,000 books, and those have gone into 30 states and probably 90 different institutions across those 30 states. And so yeah, but also in sort of facilitating that, it's been constant conversations with people in the DOC. It's been constant conversations with these haven't been as intense, but with publishers. But the thing that's been intense is like just talking to security people on the ground. It's
What
a
is
job.
the censorship like to get certain types of
You
books
know,
in?
I mean, like it ain't no censorship. I mean, look, the thing is, there are a lot of horrible things about prison, and I think it's really easy to try to put all of that on the weight of the guards, on the COs, on administrators. But a lot of it is just the weight on us. We've just decided that we want people locked up for 30 years, for 40 years, or for 50 years. And so we say things like censorship because we want to stigmatize the system. But honestly, I don't think it's a lot of censorship in the system. I think what happens is a lot of times I've had books of mine, get censored. But I had a chapter called How to Make a Knife in Prison. And so the guard gets the book, and the guard is like, why does this guy order 12 copies of this? How to make a knife? Oh,
It
I
turns
don't
out that if you
know,
order 12 copies of the book, they all assemble to
Right.
make a knife
Uh,
in
that'd have been
prison.
that'd have been great. But even in that situation, because I was like, listen, this is not about how to make a knife. I mean, this is like your Fisher Price version of making a knife. And if you read the chapters, making a larger point. And I had a conversation with the folks. I had to get some lawyers involved, but eventually we had a conversation, and they was like, oh, you're right. And they put the book back in the system. So I think when we talk about censorship, you have to ask what efforts have been in place to kind of help the system understand what a particular book is trying to do, and also if the censorship has been challenged. Some states are like, yo, we don't want you to have books in that depict like sexual violence, and it's an argument to be made that, well, I don't know if we want to make that a bright line because there's a lot of brilliant works of art that do that. But you could hear other people saying, nah, I think we should make that a bright line. And so I think it's just you got to have a sophisticated way to think about it.
Yeah. Um, Ben just gave $500 to the Million Book Project. I am going to match that. I'm not asking everyone to go and I don't think Ben and I are asking everyone to go and put $500 in, but we're going to both do that and tweet that out. And I think that like that is
But if you want to make a contribution, you should do so and tweet that you did, and that
we'll retweet you.
will spread it around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm gonna
flag
tell
us in the tweet, and we will retweet it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell your audience, I tell everybody who's here, and I thank y'all for coming. I'll tell you one secret. I can't tell you all of the details yet because it's not right. But on March
Just one.
4th, we're gonna have a really dope event for folks.
Ooh,
It's going to reveal an aspect of the Million Book Project that is has yet to be revealed. And actually, I will tell you a part of it. And no one knows this, so you guys will be the first people to know this.
breaking news over here.
I started a publishing company,
I
and
was
it's
just gonna ask you if you're gonna do this, and like, are you doing stuff in the
ah,
public domain?
you know, you give people an inch and then they take a mile. You know, but the company is called Fentress, Tunstall, and Williams, doing business as Fetz, Juvie, and Luke. I named it after three friends that I got out of prison in the last year. Two I represented on parole. One I helped get a pardon. My man Juvie, he was my cell partner for like 2 years. And I started representing him when I was in law school. And I remember going down to argue for the parole board. Actually, I'll tell you a little bit about this. But so I had some prison paper made, and I had folks send me their clothes, right? And they sent me their clothes, and I made these gray sheets of paper. This is a piece right here. So they sent me their sweatpants, and I turned their sweatpants into paper.
No.
And they sent it was like sweatpants, t-shirts, and everything. And then in Virginia, the industry down there, they make towels, and so I took the towels and we made black sheets of paper like this. And the whole idea of making the paper was like, how do you make somebody's life exist outside of prison when they're in prison? And so, we included it as a part of the art exhibit I did, and we hung it on the walls. And then my man died, and I was like, the paper represents them in prison, but it doesn't really capture that whole spirit. It doesn't say anything about freedom. And in fact, when I made the paper, they were locked up. And it was February 7th when I went down to Virginia to talk to the parole board. So it was just a year ago today when I went down to Virginia to talk to the parole board for Juvie and Fetz. So anyway, I'm working with this Japanese artist named Kyoko, and she takes washi. She takes handmade Japanese paper typically, and she like puts mica in it, and she puts like sand in it and different materials, and she just adds this wonderful touch to it. But she also puts documents. So like this one right here, she got a hold on 11th century documents. They end up being like tax records, and she floats that into the page too. And so I had all these letters of friends of mine, and she told me to send her the letters. And so I sent her a stack of letters, and this one says stack from Juvie, from Fetch, from Luke, from all these cats. And this one is actually like the letter that Juvie wrote me back when we was in law school, and it has the address on it, 6900 Atmore Drive, which is the address to the parole board when he was first asking me to represent him on parole. And
Mm.
so, and we look, she's making 1,000 of these for me for this other project. I did a solo show, so I did a solo theater piece, and part of the stage is going to be these 1,000 kites. But the point is, I named the company after them because you're trying to find a way to grasp freedom, and you're trying to find a way to really articulate what it means to want to move beyond a space where you were. And so that's what that represents, but that's what the company represents.
So I have that's really inspiring, and I don't mean to bring this down to a level of technical bullshit, but uh, did in the last year you said you got a parole award in Virginia?
I got two people out on parole in Virginia. So this
So
was,
so
yeah.
that I just want to say, like, for people who don't know
Yeah.
the criminal justice system in Virginia, parole was abolished in Virginia in 98 or 99, I forget which, and it exists only residually for people who were convicted before that. It is granted in, incredibly rarely. And I only know of one Virginia inmate, my old bank robber friend Ed Safran, who I used to correspond with when he was inside, got parole a few years ago. But it's super super rare in Virginia, and so I just want to flag that's a significant advocacy accomplishment to get anybody out on parole in Virginia, let alone two people.
And I don't like, and it's
Yeah.
also like, it's a lot of like, not code switching isn't like quite the right term, but like, yeah, kind of part code switching, but just like part like mindscape switching to go between walking in front of a parole board and marshaling the arguments and
Word,
all of
I did
the
not know that.
right. It's like such a
Parole is
big deal.
Italian for words.
Oh, really interesting. I did not know that either.
That's a
Jonathan
poem.
Rodenberg dropping the knowledge in the chat. Yeah, no, I think that there's something super interesting there about like basically being able to go in front of a parole board and then also to organize an entire project that has the logistical nature that this does and the fundraising nature that this does and like everything and curating it is just like it's kind of amazing. I think I want to ask you a question, which is just like, okay, so I have my bookcase behind me. I want to know a question. Did you put this in? Is this book in your, I've told you about this is my favorite book. This is my copy of my book. And it like is,
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
oh no. No, it won the Pulitzer Prize. It's really
No,
good.
no. I mean, there's a lot of books in there, and I have taken into account the books friends of mine love. Because one thing is every book is a story, and it's
Yeah.
not just the book; it's the story that comes with it.
Mm,
And before I forget, I should say two things about Virginia. Um, one, Virginia brought back parole, but they brought back parole for juveniles who had been charged as adults, and so this happened like in July. They brought back parole for that group of people. They also brought back parole for fishback for people that fall under fishback, and these were folks who had a jury trial right around that time when they abolished parole, and the jury wasn't aware that parole had gotten abolished. So over the past year, it's roughly maybe 300, people that's juveniles that's in prison. Now you only eligible after they said you only eligible after 20 years. So it's about 200 of those folks that's eligible, and all of my guys that did more than 20 years, they did like 25 years. But so yeah, and they abolished the death penalty. But you
Right.
gotta understand that they did this because it's been the first time in a quarter century that the Democrats have controlled the legislature, and so that's how they
hmm
were able to do that. You had like one Republican senator that was blocking the bill that would have brought back parole. And it's not as if it's easy now to make parole. It's still unbearably difficult to make parole, but at least folks have a chance.
But my impression of the parole reform last summer was that it was a very narrow slice of the inmate population that it even applied to. Is that
Yeah, it might be 500 total people, and the other problem is that it's hard to identify those 500 people because you have to find a person that had a jury trial, and the jury didn't know that parole had been abolished, and so they got to go and look into all of these records and try to identify folks. And if you're a juvenile, look, I'm 40. I got guys in there that's 40 now. You don't have a thing on your ID card that says how old you were when you got locked up. So they got classifications that's now, basically playing goldfish with people's names to try to find out who had got incarcerated for a crime that they committed before they turned 18. It's kind of fucked up. They haven't the parole board. They aren't the people that make the decision of who's eligible. It's the classification committee. So it's kind of wild. But with it being narrow, it's still just hard to identify the folks who are now eligible. I'm representing a few people now. It is really difficult.
Yeah.
all right? Alice Lee, you get the first question today.
So this is maybe kind of a fluff question, but I was wondering if there's one book that you immediately thought had to be the first book on every shelf.
Me, I thought, I don't know. I'm gonna make up an answer. Uh, I, so, so I thought A Lesson Before Dying, right? But A Lesson Before Dying has meant so many different things to me. It's the first book I read cover to cover. I read it when I was at the county jail. I read it cover to cover, from like 5 p.m. Stayed up all night finishing reading it, right? And when I read it, it made me think it was powerful. Like, how do you demand somebody have dignity when when they about to be executed for a crime they didn't commit? And I didn't realize that he was a juvenile when he got locked up, and that I was a juvenile. And then I came home and I was doing a discussion in DC. It was like the yearly, the book, like the one book. And I was on a panel, and it was right after this car, this drive-by shooting where 5 people got murdered, and a father whose son got murdered and a mother whose daughter got murdered were at the event. And because the juvenile detention center folks were involved, they were complaining because they thought the juvenile detention center folks let some folks out too early, and that they were responsible for the shooting. And then people slammed the photos of their child in front of me, and it crushed me. So that book like represents a few tensions. You know, the pain of violence and really what it means on to the community. But then also it represents like my own learning of law. And then later on, when I went to law school, it began to represent the fact that wait a minute, how do you write a whole 300-page book and nobody's like, how do you execute somebody that's innocent? And it lets me know how different the time was when Ernest Gaines wrote it, because it was absolutely plausible for somebody to get executed who was innocent. Where like now, no contemporary writer could write that book and the center of that book not be a fight for the
For the
freedom.
innocence. Yeah,
Right. So that's kind of
completely.
wild.
It's a totally wild thing. Oh, I love that. It's also just like a, yeah, it's just such a look back at like what, how much we have so far to go for criminal justice reform, so far to go. But it's also like, there have been like baby steps, like maybe
Yeah.
they're like kind of, and so that's not worth, it's worth mentioning.
You
Absolutely.
know, the postman always rings twice is that's the premise of it, right? At the end of it, he's gotten away with the murder he committed and he gets executed for the murder he didn't commit. And it's I guess the idea is kind of that that's some kind of rough justice, and it's basically unquestioned in the book. Like, all right, you got him. You know,
And
he
jurists
the
say that though. I mean, my man he got out on a pardon. Like he got pardoned. He didn't commit the crime. The jurors, when they went to interview the jurors said, "Well, we didn't think he did this, but we figured he did something."
yeah, it's like right.
Like,
But I think it's interesting that like in the 30s, I don't know remember when that book was written, but mid 30s maybe. It's like it's from the narrator, like that there's something roughly right about this,
That if you don't
um,
get them on one thing, you get them on the other. It's
or if
1946.
you don't get me on one thing,
Right.
right? I killed a guy and took his wife, but now I'm being electrocuted for killing the wife, which I actually had nothing to do with.
Yep.
right.
It's roughly justice.
Yep.
I
Uh,
think, yeah, I think it is roughly justice unless you didn't do anything.
Yeah, unless you're just like a
yeah.
fucking postman and just like walking around doing nothing.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've often tried to donate books to prisons when in the process of moving or just needing more space because I've run out of space. And you run into all kinds of obstacles. You touched on this a little bit earlier with Ben's question about censorship, but they make it really difficult to do it, and different systems have different rules and regulations. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the policies that
Yeah, it's a
could make
few. I
books
mean, it's
more accessible?
well, it's a few huge challenges. One, the prison can do whatever it wants if it's doing it for penological purposes, security, safety. And so you say, well, what does the books have to do with security or safety? Well, I mean, first they say no hardback books because you could beat somebody to death with a hardback book. I mean,
Is that why? Oh, I thought it
Jason
was 'cause
Bourne
you could
can.
hide stuff in it or
You can
something.
hide stuff in it too, but you can hide stuff, contraband. But Jason Bourne could beat somebody to death with one. But but then
I
you
should
say,
have
well,
like, I
but
don't
then you
know.
say, well, how come you can't have paperback books donated? And one of the reasons right now is that again, you can have contraband hidden in the paperback books, and then too because now they got all of these drugs that you could like soak drugs in the paper, and it doesn't show. A lot of systems say, well, this is why we don't allow paperback books, and so they tend to only allow things from very specific vendors. And the idea used to be that the vendor is vetted, and then maybe the vendor collects books from other people. But they've just clamped down on it, clamped down on it, and clamped down on it. But my thing is, I want to give people new books because I want new books, and so we putting all new books in prison in the same way that you would in like you know in a library.
Do you like a new book? I like an old book. Is that true?
Nah.
Like, look at this shit. I love this. This thing is like, I dropped this in the bathtub so many
Yeah, but
times.
they say you said you dropped it. Like I like books that I made old.
Oh,
I don't.
that's true.
I don't want your funk on my book. I don't like want your history. The worst thing in life for me is like, and I will say though, somebody just sent me a first edition, Robert, a first edition Black Boy,
Oh, Wow.
And now
Jesus.
I love that book, but I'm also afraid to open it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like
yeah.
Yeah,
it's
you're not gonna read it, right?
right.
It's that's a collector's item.
So yeah, so I like books that I made old, though. I don't like books that other people made old.
That's fair.
James Heckle, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sure can.
Yes. So, I actually asked this question before the Amanda Gorman came up, but who are your favorite poets who are younger than yourself?
That's a good question. I mean,
Yeah.
but younger than myself is arbitrary. But I like this cat. Ricky Lawrence is a really good poet. Um, Nate Marshall is a really good poet. I don't know though, because I think when you're a writer, you don't actually think about how old people are. Like everybody's almost the same age, and somebody's 34. It's like I would think that they're a dick if they was like, well, yeah, I'm younger than Dwayne. It's like you 34. I mean, you're not like younger than me. So I think about more of my contemporaries. Jericho Brown is great, and I think he's older than me, but it's like 1 or 2 years. John Murillo, Natalie Diaz. I to think about younger writers, I had to scratch my head a little bit to think about who was actually younger than me. But who would I want to tell you to read that I know is younger? It'd be Ricky Lawrence. Um, it'd be Danez. Danez is good. Uh, Morgan Parker is good. But I don't know. I think about it a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
You should do a list. You should make a list. You should tweet a list. It would be
Yeah,
great.
I'll make a list. I
Yeah.
think people might like that.
Yeah.
Laura
that would be great.
McClellan.
Hi, Laura.
We finally got you on
Hi.
screen. The,
Yeah,
the audience will never know, except because I'm saying it now, what a heroic endeavor on my part it took to get you on the screen.
Thank you for trying over and over again, Ben. So, to give a little background, my paternal grandfather worked as a teacher at what was called a United States Industrial Reformatory in Chillicothe, Ohio, in the 30s and 40s. And from the documents that I've found, they had a large library, like 10,000 books. They had 5 teachers. They had actually, it was mandatory education to a certain level that you had to prove. And then they had technical education. It just seems so different from what we have today. I know this is a huge question, but how can we get back to the idea of prisons as actual reformatories and instead of just punishment centers?
I mean, I think first we need to dramatically reduce the number of people that we have in prison. And I mean dramatically and aggressively reduce the number of people we have in prison. And then, anything that's related to reform or rehabilitation doesn't have a budget line item. And so if it doesn't have a budget line item, it actually just does not matter. And some librarians was talking to me and they said, Dwayne, how can we get our budget, a line item on our budget for books? Because it doesn't exist right now. And so I would say those two things is one, dramatically reduce the prison population, and 2, get budget line items for things that matter. Things have been changing. I mean, they got college programs all across the country now. In California, community colleges are in every prison in California. So that exponentially increases the access to prison education for folks inside. But it's wild though, because I say exponentially increases, and that's just saying that it increased it from 3 to 100. But a lot of times that's still just no more than 10% of the prison population.
Yeah.
Yeah, just one other thing on that note, which is that, you actually have to have a society that believes in
rehabilitation,
and it's and that has to be a principal goal of at least some very substantial portion of the criminal justice incarceration system. If you don't, it's fine if you want to wall off the Charles Mansons and say, okay, fine. But there was a point in the 80s early 90s when we just decided as a society that we didn't believe in that anymore. And that was a choice, you know, and that choice can be unmade. Like, we could decide that we believed in this again.
Yeah.
David Botts, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Ben, for bringing me on. Mr. Betts, two questions for you. One, what are your thoughts about reforms to reduce or eliminate for-profit prisons and detention centers? And then secondly, do you have suggestions for books for young readers to learn more about the struggle for civil rights within the United States?
Great questions.
Yeah, those are two good questions. The first one, I think the first one, the trick of the question was when you said and detention centers, because I think private prisons make up like 78% of the detention centers, but they only make up like 8% of the prisons. And also, it's interesting. A friend of mine is at a prison now where I served time at. It was just a guard got stabbed, and then they sent the dog in the K9, and the K9 got killed, and then the K9's handler got stabbed. This was a state prison. Then they sent the riot squad in, and they were shooting real bullets, and they put flash bombs in there. This is a state prison, and so I think sometimes we talk about private prisons and state prisons as if it's like some fine line of demarcation between how the profit motive reflects the conditions of the prison, and it's just not true. And so I would say, in terms of prisons, I would want to find a way to spend my time less railing against private and state-run prisons, and more railing against overcrowded prisons that aren't safe, prisons that don't provide the resources to rehabilitate the people that are in there. And then I think the immigration question and the detention center question is just a completely different can of beans that I feel like I'm just not equipped to talk intelligently about. Besides the fact that, once you change policies, just like in prisons, then you change the need for those places. And it's not necessarily about the existence of those places, but it's about how we have policies that have made prisons, both private and state-run prisons and federal prisons, like fundamentally essential and necessary for how we do business. And we can make a different decision, and I think we just have to make a different decision.
Would the different decision be to get rid of privately run prisons?
No, I think the different decision would be to bring back parole. You got states now that had like a 5% parole rate. Make the parole rate 20%. Make the parole rate 25%. I think the difference would be, don't send people to prison for 100 years. Don't send somebody to prison for 35 years for like robbery. Like you should just draw a line in the sand.
Guidelines reform and things like that. No, I think that's completely like, that's so lucid and sensical.
Just a quick factual matter with respect to some of the questions in the chat. There's something about 1.8. My numbers aren't up to date, but something between 1.8 and 2 million people in prison in the United States. About 200,000 of them are in federal prisons. The state systems account for the overwhelming majority of prisoners in the United States. So, when people talk about federal policy, you're actually talking about a relatively small slice of the pie.
Right. And again, we say perverse incentives. That's the suggestion is that the states don't have the same perverse incentives. I was not eating steak in the state prisons I was in. I wasn't even eating fried chicken. I was eating gruel. So it's not as if the state prisons didn't have the same kind of perverse conditions. When somebody comes home after 25 years and they die of a disease they didn't know they have, it's also because the state prison system wasn't providing adequate health care. All of these systems end up having perverse incentives.
Yes.
And it's partially because the budgets are out of whack, and you don't want to give more money to a prison budget, but you wouldn't have to if you didn't lock up so many people.
Yeah, so this is just a foot stomp this point. We should have Vicky on the show. But my friend Vicky Wakino has spent a lot of years now working on improving prison health care. And this is a national disaster. And, we get a glimpse of it in the context of COVID, where, the prison healthcare systems are just completely incapable of handling. And, it's a genuinely hard situation. You have a lot of people living in close confinement. You're going to have significant spread. But there is a huge policy problem with just providing basic levels of healthcare in prison, because people really don't. It's more than not caring. It's feeling like, at a certain level, the inadequacy of the services provided is kind of part of the punishment, right? And that's kind of some of the mindset that you really want to attack. I will see if I can get Vicky to come on the show and talk about this, but it's a real
No, totally.
crisis.
Yeah.
Richard Wattenbarger, the floor
Hi.
is yours.
I'm really enjoying this show. I just find these stories about redemption and so on. I find them very powerful, very moving, and hopeful, and all sorts of other things along the way. So this has really been great. I'd like to. My question is, if you found that telling your story rather than just reciting statistics or making arguments, if that's given you opportunities to change how people who have been skeptical, to change how they think about incarceration and redemption.
Well, yeah, because I'm a storyteller, so I think statistics are mostly lies anyway. We just prison policy initiative every
Or they're
year.
just bad stories, Dwayne. They're not
They're
lies.
just-
They're
they're
just
just
bad stories.
Well, maybe that's true. And so I would say that, like, so yeah, I would say I think the telling the story is effective. But one of the reasons why the telling the story is effective is because I'm like just self-interested as a writer. But I also think the telling the story is effective is, you take like my Kamala Harris piece. The statistics only sort of tell one flattened story. And in the Kamala Harris piece, I was trying to tell like multiple really complicated stories. It's like I was asking, how is it that I want a certain thing to happen to the person that assaulted my mom? And that, like, I'm not really that invested in that freedom. And yet I represent people who kill folks, and I'm really invested in my friend's freedom. And you go into a community center, or you go into a church, or you just go into a neighborhood, and you hear them praise Kamala Harris, and you hear them not denigrate her for her work as a prosecutor. But you go to I go to my friends who all went to law school and all lawyers and shit, and they like, Kamala Harris is like a part of the system. She's basically sent here to help oppress black folks. It's like, nah, it's a more complicated story to tell. And if you read a book like Jill Leovey's Ghetto Side, it animates more about how complex that story is, than the one that we often get in the media. And I think that's why I find telling my story sometimes effective, because I recognize that I was equipped to do a whole bunch of things that weren't likely, but a lot of the things that I do now, the genesis was in prison. So sometimes I feel like my story makes a case for what would it mean to give others like similar opportunities, and I think that that's the case that we don't make enough.
So lovely.
Stephen Friedman, you have the last question today.
Hi.
Sorry, your camera isn't coming on. It may pop on while you're talking.
Yeah, this might be just a voice only thing. This may be very naive. I worked a long time ago in building ebooks. Did your project ever consider ebooks? Because running the numbers, you can bring down the costs of the management and the volumes and the distribution and almost everything else down radically.
Yeah, you can, but the thing that you would also bring down is the actual engagement. It's a kind of engagement that comes with holding a physical book, that comes with writing in the book, that comes with somebody going to see you pick up the book, that you can't get. And
It
also,
smells good.
and also though, we do think about the book as a piece of furniture, as a piece of art. And as beautiful as, like, e-readers might be, they don't function as a community facilitating, like, instrument device. I read Baldwin when I was a kid because I had a good friend whose mom had Baldwin on the bookshelf. like the bookshelf is a place of discovery in a way that I think the e-reader isn't. And I have an e-reader, so I'm not trying to say the e-readers don't have a role to play in all of this. I'm just saying that I think about what is lacking, what people don't have access to, and I think that the money is well spent in building a vision. And I do think as an old technology, the physical book is something of a vision. I mean, even something like I just finished reading this for the third time, and it's Marlon James, Black Leopard, Red Wolf, and I mean, it's like I just noticed the tactile feel of it, but how they printed it on Bible paper because they wanted to seduce me into not believing that this is a 600-page book. This is 600 pages. You know what I mean? You know that this is on. Yes, this is 600 pages, and it is a fantastic book. But even like,
I just wanted to seduce you into not believing it was a
I'm telling
600-page
you,
book is like the best way of putting it.
so I mean, I think that it's just something really powerful, and every time you hold a different book, it's like you're holding a different world. And you miss out on some of that with e-readers.
Yeah, I think that's true. Oh my
We're
gosh.
gonna leave. We're
I
gonna leave
missed
it
you,
there.
Dwayne. I miss hanging out and drinking whiskey in the middle of the afternoon when we were both grad students, and that's what you did.
Soon. And by middle of
Yeah, I
afternoon,
know.
we talk about 7 p.m. because I didn't drink during the day.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dwayne. You're a great American. And it's good to see your face.
It's always a
So good to
pleasure.
see
Thank
your
you.
face.
So we will be back with Jim Comey tomorrow talking about his new book about restoring the Justice Department and the values that underlie it. A little bit of a change of pace from today. That'll be 22 hours and 58 minutes from now. And until then, Kate?
We don't have fun anymore, but we can give to the Million Book Project and support Dwayne's work. And you can find it on my Twitter feed or Ben's Twitter feed, or as I will drop in the chat, the Million Book Project.org. Thank you so much for coming on today, Dwayne. It was so good to see your face. And